Hi, Ben. My name is Abraham David Faier. I was born December 12th, 1912. Easy way I remember it is just 12, 12, 12. My parents were immigrants from Romania. My father came from Vaslui, my mother came from Iasi, which is right on the border between Romania and Russia. My father first came here in the late, I think it was around 1897, can't be sure, but he was here, and then he went back. And then he came back again in the early 1900s. My mother came here in about 1907, and she came from Romania with 4 little kids. She had to cross the Atlantic, and she told me they were all seasick. You know, crossing the Atlantic in those days was a terrible job. It wasn't a quick job. It was 2 weeks or better. And I was the youngest of 8. There were 2 siblings that died over in Romania in infancy. And my mother came with 4 kids, one my oldest brother and 3 of my sisters. Then I had 1 sister and myself were born here in Nebraska, in Omaha, Nebraska. And I was born in the Wise Memorial Hospital, which is not in existence now, which very few people ever heard of it. Can you hold it for a minute? There's one thing in an immigrant family, everybody has to pull their own weight. And when I was big enough to work, which was around 12 years old, I think, I used to carry a paper route. And I carried a paper that today a lot of people never heard of, was the Omaha Daily News. And then later on, the Omaha Bee bought them out and became the Omaha Bee News. Then the World Herald bought them out, and the World Herald remained the only paper. We had just the one paper. And I did that until I graduated from grade school. I graduated from Franklin Grade School. I started grade school, though, at Long, which was up on about 26th and Franklin. And I lived on 25th and Franklin. That's the first place I remember. And right next door to us was a black church, which I think is still in existence today, some people have told me. And when it came time, I used to go to Hebrew school at the old Hebrew school on 21st and Burt, I think it was, or 22nd and Burt. And when I got close to my time for bar mitzvah, my father thought I wasn't learning enough there. So he hired a rabbi for me to come to the house. And this rabbi used to come every morning. He'd come at 6:30 and he'd shout at me, "Get out of bed, it's time to get up." Except he said in Yiddish. And we'd have to start doing our morning prayers and so forth. And my mother made something for me to wear, which most people don't see today. It's really part of an Orthodox thing. It's what they call a talis kutton or a lopsidekel. It's analogous to a talus that you wear under your garments. And I wore that while I went to grade school. I started high school, I thought it was time to stop that because I was out for athletics and I liked athletics. And I didn't like the idea of having to take my clothes off and have to wear this thing and start explaining what it all was. So anyhow, and I was bar mitzvah in the old Kapolisha Shoal. The Kapolisha Shoal was on 24th and Lake Nicholas at that time. And, you know, the kids today, they all have to give us talk, you know. I had to do my bar mitzvah as usual, but then I had to give a speech, and I had to give it in Yiddish. Rabbi, of course, I could speak Yiddish because my folks spoke Yiddish in the house, and I understood Yiddish pretty well. Fact is, I understood Yiddish better when I was about 5 years old than English. My sisters kind of taught me to speak English better, which I picked up more as I started school. So after my bar mitzvah, I figured that it was time to let some of those things go, and I started high school. When I started high school, I started Central High School, and I liked Central. It was okay. I spent my first year there. but I always had to walk to school, you know, I lived about 2 miles from school. And wintertime, that was a long walk in the snow. And my folks had moved the following year, and they moved up to 32nd between Cummings and I guess the next street over is about Nicholas or thereabout. And it was only about a block and a half or 2 blocks from Tech, and I figured, why should I walk to Central? Although I like going to Central, so why should I walk there? And I decided to go to Tech, and I transferred to Tech High. But when I was at Central, I did go out for athletics then, and did you go to Central? Mr. Bedell, do you ever know Mr. Bedell? He was a mathematics teacher. He was the wrestling coach. He got me to go out for wrestling, which I did. And I was just a tall, skinny guy then. And then I played freshman football for Papa Schmidt. And that's when I got started with the athletics. I came over to Tech. I continued that. I kept up with the wrestling routine, and I played on the Tech football team, except I had a catastrophe on the Tech football team. I got injured in a game. I had my nose broken, and they fixed it up pretty good. And they always had a football banquet at the end of the year, you know. And they didn't have a banquet that year. One of the fellows said to Jim Drummond, who was the coach, they said, how come we're not having a football banquet? He says, well, he had a southern drawl. He says, well, he said, we had to spend $1 million on Fair's nose. But they did get it fixed up good for me. And then out of wrestling, I won a high school wrestling championship. And I graduated from Tech in 1931. And I worked all the time that I went to high school because I was planning to go to college, and we were not a wealthy family by any means. And so I used to work all the summers, and I used to work weekends whenever I got a chance to do that. And I started up at Creighton University. And at that time, I decided I wanted to go into something in the health science. And I'm not sure why I picked dentistry. I think maybe it was because it was a year shorter at the time. And, you know, working and going to school was not easy because I worked all through the time that I went to Creighton. I had to do that in order to pay my tuition. Of course, I had board and room at home, but my folks couldn't afford to pay anybody out for anything. But anyway, I still like to pursue athletics, and I still belong to the Jewish Community Center. I used to go down to the old Jewish Community Center on 20th and Dodge, and I used to, did you ever know Manny Siegel? Manny Siegel was the director when I came down there. And Manny was a Big 8 champion from Wisconsin, and I used to wrestle with him. He weighed less, 135, I weighed 158, but he was strong. And anyway, I used to work out with him, and he said to me, he says, you know, he says, the Olympics are going to be coming up. He says, I like taking the Olympic tryouts. I said, well, if you want to take me, I'll go, you know. So in 1932, he took me to the Olympic tryouts. But one thing he failed to do, he failed to tell me the rules. The rules of Olympic wrestling are much different than they are in amateur wrestling in high school and so forth. So actually, it's not an excuse, but I really lost my own match. So I really don't know whether I'd have done any better or not. But anyway, it was an experience. And while at Creighton and at dental school, I still like to do some exercise, and it was easier for me to go over to the gym. They had an old gym there, if you remember. And they had a handball court. It wasn't the greatest. I used to go up there and play handball. And I got to be a very decent handball player, and I won the Creighton University Championship in handball. They got my picture in the Blue Jay here, so I'll show it to you later. And then I had in my mind, as it got towards my senior year, I felt like I wanted to get more training of some sort. I just didn't feel that what I'd had was adequate. It was okay for doing filling, stuff like that, but when it came to the surgical aspect, and I liked that part of it. fact, I had back in my mind, maybe I would pursue that. So anyhow, that year that I spent at it was called the Anchor Hospital. The Anchor Hospital is a St. Paul City and County Hospital. It was always a prize that was given to a graduate from the University of Minnesota. I was the first outsider to ever have that internship there. It was mostly just a surgical internship, and I had just a wonderful man to work with there. And his name was Sam Ziegler. He happened to be a Jewish fellow, but he was an excellent oral surgeon. And I gained a lot from him, and I used to do an awful lot of work there. I used to do fractures and soft tissue tumors, just a various number of things. And I was free to get involved in all departments of the hospital there. I even went on ambulance calls sometimes, but there wasn't too much danger in that because when the ambulance went out, the rule of the hospital was the patient has to come in. You can never leave it. So no matter what the situation was, you had to bring the patient in. So that was already preset, so to speak. And I was interested in anesthesia in those times too, and I went down to see the superintendent of the hospital to ask him if I could spend more time in anesthesia, because I said dentists are interested in anesthesia. And he looked at me for a minute and he thought, and he said, well, he said, okay, so just don't kill anybody. You know, in those days there were no anesthesiologists. The anesthesia was given by nurses. Anesthesia wasn't that sophisticated. And I'll have to admit, I learned a lot from the nurses of what they were doing. And from the important thing was to know the machine and how to use it. Because your anesthetic drugs were pretty limited. Didn't use that many. They were still using a lot of ether and that kind of stuff, which I don't think anybody uses today. And I was getting towards the close of my internship there, and I wrote a letter to the Mayo Clinic, and I thought maybe I might pursue it there. I think you would turn it off at this point, because I don't think I should. So I had to go back home and decide to make a living. And I opened up an office. I opened my office with $400 I borrowed. And I equipped it, and I went in with a older practitioner. He had he had one operatory that was vacant, and his son had been a dentist. His son just didn't take to practicing. That's also an interesting story, but I'll tell you that later. So I moved in with him, and I was there from 1937 until 1940. But I will ahead the story, and I went out with Liberty originally several years before that. I think I must have been about 19 years old when I first went out with Liberty. And I was on a double date with Eve Marks, maybe you knew Eve, and Gertrude Rothcup. Her name today, she married Don Brodkey, an attorney who was on the state Supreme Court. Well, anyhow, the four of us went out, and while we were out, Gertrude says to Liberty, she says, how old are you, Liberty? Liberty says, 14. And she says to me, says, Abe, what are you doing with such a young girl? I said, I don't know who she was. I said, she looked a little older than that. And anyway, when I took Liberty home, I said to her, I said, Lib, it was a nice evening, but I said, you go home and grow up, and I'll come back one of these days. So about 7 years later, so that would be about 1939, I was a member of Pi Lambda Phi at that time, and they had a Valentine's party. I needed a date, so I called Lib. I took her out, and we hit it off pretty good, and we became engaged. and we got married in August of 1939. And we've been married going on 65 years this year.
Tell me about your wedding.
Oh, the wedding?
Yes.
Well, the wedding, there wasn't any Bethel synagogue at that time. There was a Bethel, but they didn't have a building. And Rabbi Goldstein was the rabbi at that time. And they used to meet at the Jewish Community Center. So when it came time for us to get married, we couldn't get married in the synagogue. So we got married at the Birchwood, which is out north. Maybe you knew the place at one time. Birchwood Club, they called it. And Rabbi Goldstein performed the ceremony, David Goldstein. And we had a chuppah, a canopy that was four-tier, we had 4 posts. And during the ceremony, Sam Cooper was one of the people that was holding a post there, I think, as I remember. And I don't know, I guess he got too intent on watching the ceremony and he let the chuppah drop on his head. Well, he caught that pretty quick. And we got through that okay. You know how time changes. The rabbi that married us is gone. My best men are gone. My groomsmen are gone. The people that signed my wedding certificate, the ketubah, they're gone.
Who were the people that you were groomsmen in the wedding?
Eve Marks was one, and my cousin Samuel Z. Faier. Sam was a nose and throat man here at one time. And after the war, Sam didn't come back here. He settled somewhere else. But those were the two. And so anyhow, Liv and I were married. And after a year or so, I bought a little piece of ground out west on Pierce Street to build a house. So we built a little bungalow out there. It wasn't anything real fancy, but it was a nice little house. And it was on 64th and Pierce. At that time, we just old farmland practically, not much out there. Go out there today, there are houses right on top of each other. And anyhow, we built the house and we moved in. And we lived there just about from 1940 to 1941. And one day I got greetings from the government to go on active duty. And I don't know if you had to do this when you were in school or not. When we were in school, everybody was required to take military science. It was just part of the curriculum. And then on graduation, they made you reserve officer. So you didn't have any choice. You had to do that. That was part of it. And when I came to, my first post was Camp Livingston, Louisiana. And when I came there, after I was inducted and so forth, I met a lot of my classmates that were all called the same time, the whole class. So it created a big problem when I got that notice, because I had to store my office equipment and I had the house, and we had to do something with the house. We rented it for a while, and while I was in the service, we decided to sell the house. I had expert advice that after the war everything will be cheaper, and how wrong could they be? So we sold the house, and I went into service in 1941 and got out in 1945. And when I come back and wanted to buy something to live in, there wasn't too much to buy, and everything was very expensive compared to what it was. But we bought a house and we had a place to live. And an automobile was almost impossible to get. See, when I went into the Army, I had a 39 Plymouth, and I drove it all the way down to Alexandria, Louisiana, and I had to go through the Ozarks there to get to Alexandria. And the thing was that the brake system, something happened. I was going through those Ozarks and I didn't have any brakes. Luckily, there was nobody else around. I finally got stopped. I was in a small town there, and I found a mechanic who, you know, if you had a uniform on, they were pretty nice to you in those days. He took my car and he fixed it up. I made the trip the rest of the way. But when I got back and out of the service, and I wanted a car, I couldn't get a car. I had friends who were in the car business, but they couldn't get cars. So anyway, what I did, I bought an old taxi. I don't know how many miles it had on it, but then I finally got a car from Harry Smith. And I didn't get much for the old taxi, but I got rid of it. Well, anyhow, prior to my going into the military, when I came home and got into practice, you know, you're not that busy when you first start. And I was used to working, and I didn't want to loaf around. So they had a health clinic out north. It was called the Emmanuel Baptist Clinic, that was sponsored by the Emmanuel Baptist Church, which didn't make any difference. They wanted a dentist, and the doctor who was in charge of it was Van Fleet. He was a medical man there. He came to see me and asked me if I would come out and take care of patients. On Thursday morning, I had more patients. All we did was take care of toothaches, nothing more. But on Thursday morning, I had more people, and you could take care of it. You could extract all day long if you were there. And then I used to contribute one afternoon a week to the Hattie B. Monroe Home for Crippled Children, which is now part of the Myers setup for children. And between that and my practice, and I was belonged with the Cosmopolitan Club and B'nai B'rith and different things, kept me involved. My practice grew. And by the time I got called to service, I just had my feet on the ground. And I had to start all over again practically. So,
What kind of dental work did you do while you were in the service?
well, I did general dentistry, and I did a lot of extraction work. I was stationed in one place in a Japanese prisoner war camp, and I used to take care of the Japanese prisoners. They had some Japanese dentists there, and they always wanted to know about oral surgery, see, third molars and stuff like that. And I used to tell them, I said, you bring the patients, you got a lot of patients here, and a lot of Japanese people there, and I'll show you how to do third molars, which I did. So I used to do all the right thing. I used to get shifted around a lot. And then when I got back in practice, well, prior to my going to the service, I also was a scoutmaster. I got some pictures here I'll show you. I gave some awards to some of the boys, and one of the boys I gave an award to was Dick Wintrobe. I don't know if you ever knew Dick Wintrobe or not, but Dick was an engineer. His folks were in the air conditioning business here, and Dick moved out east, and he died very young. I don't recall what happened to him, but he was a heck of a scout. And then when I got back into practice again, I started affiliating with Children's Hospital, and at that time we were doing a lot of children's dentistry under general anesthesia. I don't know if they're still doing much of that way or not, but I used to do a lot of work on it, children's. And I was president of the dental staff at two different times, 1967, I think, and 1970. And I've also I don't want to waste your film. I got a humanitarian award from Children's Hospital in '57, and I got a certificate of appreciation from Children's Hospital in 1977. I got a service award from Children's Hospital in 1960. I got a 25-year teaching plaque from Creighton University in 1977. And when I was in oral surgery, I had the rank of clinical professor of oral surgery. And then when I retired from practice and I went to full-time teaching, I went into the Department of Oral Diagnosis and Radiology, and there I was an associate professor of oral diagnosis and radiology. When I came back in 1945, about 1946, we had a new organization that started up, the AMVETS, the American Veterans World War II. And I became commander of the Veterans World War II in that year, and the following year I was state commander. And I haven't had too much to do with it since, though. And I was a member of Omicron Kappa Epsilon. That's the honorary dental fraternity. I'm a life member of the District, State, American Dental Association. I was a captain in U.S. Dental Corps, 41 to 45. When I left the military, I did not get a discharge. I got a certificate of service. They wouldn't discharge us at that time. It was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years later that I finally got a discharge from them. I'm a life member in the Shrine, a life member of B'nai B'rith. I authored 16 dental articles while during my time that I was in practice. And I gave time to the cancer screening clinics. Did quite a bit of that with for Dr. Lynch, who was head of the cancer setup at Creighton. And I presented clinics at the state meeting for, I don't know, many years. You can just about see what it's all about there.
Let me hear about your family, Abe.
Oh, my boys?
Yes.
We have 2 boys, Liv and I. Neither one of them live here, unfortunately. I could sure use a little help every once in a while. One of them lives in Tennessee, and the other one lives in Arizona. Originally, he lived in Overland Park, and about 2 years ago, he decided he didn't like cold weather anymore, and he moved to Arizona. So they come here frequently, but like I say, it's not easy for us to travel anymore, so we don't make the trips too much anymore. And Matt does anesthesia. He's in Tennessee, Matt. And Jerry, he's in the antique clock business. Jerry's a very interesting guy. He went to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and he had a Bachelor of Science in Zoology, and then he got a Master's in Zoology, and he did a year of PhD, and then he went to teaching. And he really didn't care for teaching that much. He's a good talker, and he can do a lot of things, but he just didn't like the setup in the high schools. So I come over to his house one time when he was in Overland Park, and I see he's got a bunch of clocks around there. And I said, Jerry, what are you doing with all those clocks? Oh, he says, I'm fixing them. I said, where'd you learn to do that? Oh, he said, it was a hobby with me. And anyhow, that hobby turned into a business for him. And he had his own building in Overland Park, and he had his own crew of people that worked for him. And his clock business got pretty good. He did that for 25 years there. And he just decided that he didn't want the cold weather anymore, and he moved to, forget the name of the town though. They will have to tell you. I always like to call it Oakdale, but it's not Oakdale. It's about 50, 60 miles from Phoenix. And he bought a building there, and he started back in business again. And he said he just loves it down there. And my grandkids, I've got one grandson who's a computer engineer, and the girl he married has a master's in architectural design. And the computer engineer, he worked for Boeing for a couple of years, and then he decided he wanted to go back to school again. He quit his job at Boeing, and he went back to law school at the University of Illinois. And his wife works for an architectural firm there. She's originally from Chicago anyhow, but they both graduated from Washington University, which are a very top-rate school, as you know. And I can see his point. He'll be an expert in computer problems. It's like an expert medical legal expert. He'll be that computer problems. And then I've got a granddaughter that graduated from Creighton with a law degree. And then I have a granddaughter that graduated with highest honors at Kansas State University, and she's going to go to law school. I don't know why they all be lawyers, but they do. And she received letters from 5, 6 different universities that want her to apply. And some of them offered her scholarships. She even got a call from Harvard, and she got a call from, I don't remember all of them, from other good universities, and she also got some from Missouri, and I don't know what she's going to do. She's deciding now. She just graduated this year. And then, I guess that takes care of 3 of them, and the 4th one, the youngest grandson, he's in the Navy, and he's stationed down around Japan somewheres right now. They're all good kids.
That's all that's important.
Yeah.
How have you been spending your time since you got out of dentistry?
Well, you know, I was going away with winters, and I'll tell you, time went fast when I used to do that. And I always played racquetball. Even in Florida, I played racquetball, plenty of players. And then I got involved in jewelry work, and I was doing quite a bit of jewelry work. And to tell you the truth, it got to be a little business. And I might have kept up doing it if it weren't for my vision got bad. I don't have any depth perception anymore. I lost the vision, this one eye, from macular degeneration. So I had to just give that up. But I still I still keep up with my athletic activities. And it was nice going away. I even spent one winter in Las Vegas. It was interesting. I didn't live on the Strip. I had an apartment away from the Strip. But we used to go to the Strip. There's a lot of Omaha people down there. And I met a lot of people down there that I knew from Omaha. You know, I grew up at a time where a lot of the young fellas, well, I won't call them bums, but they were gamblers. And a lot of them are down in Vegas, and I knew them. And I used to come down there, you know. They used to treat me pretty nice. But it's all different. This fellow, I don't know if you ever knew him, he just died here this last year, Betty Abrams. Used to publish the Blue Sheet. You know, he's an Omaha boy. He grew up at that time. He was a little bit younger than I am, but I know him over the years.
Who do you have left still living as siblings?
Siblings? You're looking at it. I'm the youngest.
You're the youngest.
Yeah, there's that picture up there of the whole family. This is my family. And that's my mother in the center of her picture. And her name is Ita, I-T-A, over in Romania. Here they call her Etta Sarah Faier. And in the center is my father, the man with the mustache, as you presume. And sitting on his lap is me, is Abraham. And in the upper left-hand side is my brother John. John was 15 years older than I. And standing in front of John is my sister Rosalind. And sitting in front of Rosalind is my sister Ann. And going over to the right is my sister Tilly. And standing up on the right next to my mother is my sister Minnie. And they're all deceased now. I'm the only one out of 8 people that are still living. Out of the whole family, in those days, everybody didn't get a chance to go to school. The older kids all went to grade school and all graduated from grade school. But my sister Ann and my sister Tilly were the only 2 that graduated from high school, and I was the only one that went on to college. Life was different in those days, but they all did well in their own lives. That's my father's citizenship paper that he took out, and he has all the children on that paper, and he became a citizen in 1914. Okay. Ready? That's a certificate my father received from the state of Nebraska as game and fish warden. My father did deal in fish at one time, but he was never a hunter or a fisherman that I can recall. But he was appointed by the governor at that time. That picture is a picture of my mother and father when they first were married, when she was a bride, and he was the groom, of course. It's kind of interesting about my mother's maiden name. I always thought my mother's maiden name was Einhorn, because I had some cousins by the name of Einhorn, and of course they believed that was their name, and their dad came to this country under that name. But when my mother died, and I looked at her wedding certificate, I found her name wasn't Einhorn at all. Her name was Dubadovich. And I told my cousins about it, and it was hard for them to believe it, but I told them that's what the wedding certificate, so it must be so. Not that they wanted to change their name or anything, or would change their name, because they're all in their 75s and 80s now, I think I'll change.